Hello, I'm Stacy Keach. Join me right now for Mysterious Places as we travel to New England.
For more than 3 centuries, tales of witches and witchcraft have haunted this New England town. We find the evidence everywhere. In the 17th century house where witches were once condemned to death. In this modern-day shop, specializing in magic potions. In this graveyard, where simple epitaphs obscure tragic events. In this museum. Garden. Private home. This is a story of one town's extraordinary legacy. A legacy of death and hysteria. A legacy that has stirred debate for over 300 years. This is Salem, Massachusetts.
What is a witch? Well, the answer depends on who you ask and during what era in history. The pre-Christians associated witches with evil gods and magic spells. To the Puritans of 17th century New England, witches were ordinary-looking people who had signed a pact with the devil. As for today, well, the definition varies. The dictionary describes a witch as both a woman who practices sorcery and an ugly, vicious old hag. Modern-day witches actively fighting to change such views describe themselves as simple worshippers of nature. Well, both of these images play a part in the story we are about to tell.
Witches. Throughout history, we've envisioned them as magical and wicked. They have intrigued us, even terrified us, and we remain curious. It is this curiosity that draws thousands of visitors every year to a town on the east coast of New England, a town known as Salem, Massachusetts. This bustling seaside community 16 miles northeast of Boston has many tales to tell of witches and witchcraft. It was here 300 years ago that the infamous witch trials took place. It is here today that historians and tourists alike discuss and debate witchcraft and the events of 1692. And it is here that over 2,000 witches live, work, and worship. How did this once puritanical New England town become synonymous with the word witch? We begin our search for answers in the town of Danvers, located 5 miles northwest of Salem. In 1692, Danvers was known as Salem Village. As we travel just off the main road, we discover the archaeological ruins of the village parsonage. Here, Reverend Samuel Parris lived with his wife and 9-year-old daughter, Betty. This is where it all began. Danvers archivist Richard Trask is an expert on the Salem witch trials.
Beginning in the midwinter of 1691-92, some adolescent children living in the parsonage, the minister's house, and some other girls in the general area started going into some very strange fits, and nobody quite knew what was wrong.
They didn't know that the Paris family servant Tituba often amused Betty and her friends with tales of sorcery and black magic. These were Puritan girls. The thrill of hearing such shocking and forbidden tales stimulated their imaginations and inspired their anxiety. The girls fell into trances and convulsions. They claimed to see visions of ghosts and witches. The panicking elders had the girls examined by a town doctor. His diagnosis: witchcraft was to blame.
In the 17th century, witchcraft was pretty much a universal belief, especially amongst the regular people. And the idea of witchcraft was that there was such a thing as a literal devil, and the devil was trying to overcome God and his kingdom on earth. And the people who had settled in New England, the Puritans, believed themselves to be really the children of God, and they thought that they were very susceptible to attacks by the devil.
Had the devil succeeded in infiltrating Salem village? Were witches casting their evil spells? The Puritans began to think so. Alarm spread beyond Salem village to the entire community. The girls were pressured into naming their tormentors, the so-called witches who were to blame for their fits. Soon, all of Salem rang out with the names of those accused.
For there be some among us who send out evil spirits against me and others. I call out till Sarah God did it. She brought me to it. She made me sign the devil's book.
Weeks ago, my husband and I were accused by some children of signing a covenant with the devil.
By May of 1692, indictments were handed down to many citizens of Salem. The accused were immediately examined for blemishes or marks of the devil. Many examinations took place here in the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin. Today, visitors can see exactly where the accused witches pled their cases. Many simply confessed. They were set free. Others maintained their innocence. They were sent to the gallows. Eventually, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft. The plight of one holds a particular poignancy. Her name was Rebecca Nurse, and her home still stands in Danvers today.
We're here at the Nurse homestead. In 1692, this was the homestead of Francis and Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca is probably the most famous of the witchcraft victims. This square-shaped room was the Great Hall, and there was one room above it known as the Hall Chamber. And it was here in 1692 that Rebecca Nurse was bedridden, and she had a visit from several neighbors. And the neighbors came here and told her that in fact she was being cried out upon as a witch. And after a couple minutes of stunned silence, she said to her neighbor friends, "I am as innocent as the child unborn, but surely what sin hath God found out in me unrepentant of, that he should lay such an affliction upon me in my old age?"
Rebecca Nurse was tried and found innocent, but the judges rejected the decision. The jury reconvened and reached their revised verdict: guilty. On July 19, 1692, Rebecca Nurse was led to the gallows and hanged. The execution of the pious Rebecca Nurse had a chilling effect on the ongoing hysteria. Soon, many powerful villagers began to back off from the trials. Before long, the hysteria died down, but not before exacting a devastating toll. 20 people had been executed, 19 by hanging, 1 by torture. At least 4 others died in prison. The Salem witch trials lasted only 10 months, yet the town of Salem would forever be linked with witches and witchcraft.
Stay with us as we continue our investigation of the witches of Salem, Massachusetts.
Here's a mysterious places travel tip. By car, Salem is about 45 minutes from Boston. Simply take US Route 1 north. You'll pass several historic towns along the way. The interstate is another option. Take I-95 north to Route 128 north, exit at 25A, and head east into Salem.
We're back in Massachusetts with the witches of Salem.
Tranquil. Uncluttered. We can just about imagine what Salem might have been like over 300 years ago, around the time of the witch trials. Of course, Salem has changed. This is no longer a tiny village, but a bustling town driven by tourism. Much of the retail trade revolves around the town's notorious past. Yet, amidst the attractions, one can still find solemn reminders which provoke serious thought. From the graveyards, where judges and victims are buried, to the Witch Memorial commemorating the 300th anniversary of the witch hysteria. And at the Peabody Essex Institute, one can trace the story of the witch trials through original documents. The trail of these documents and others inevitably prompts the questions, how did all this happen? And why were certain people singled out for persecution and death? We see from the few surviving land deeds that bitter disputes existed between some of the accusers and their victims. So we ask, was it coincidence that Ann Putnam Jr. cried out against her neighbors, the Proctors? Could the long-running property dispute between the two families have inspired the young girl to accuse her family's rival?
Research that's been done into property records and financial records of the time suggests strongly that one of the underlying elements in the witchcraft hysteria was an opportunity for the have-nots to strike back at the haves.
Salem psychiatrist Dr. Richard Pohl has researched the Salem witch trials. His studies reveal not one, but several reasons for the sudden outbreak of accusations. Petty jealousies may have played a small part, but he believes an even more compelling reason existed: psychological hysteria.
I think that these girls were quite bored, in some ways restricted. New England life in 1692 was very stark, bleak, and that these girls in the company of Tituba found a certain permissiveness and a certain release. And this permissiveness probably exposed them to some internal conflict that they felt, doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, thinking things they weren't supposed to be thinking, and it probably expressed itself in terms of conversion symptoms.
Over the decades, many theories have come and gone. Some have even entered the realm of local legend. One of the more dubious legends involves this popular Salem site, the House of the Seven Gables. Best known as the model for Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic book, this 17th century house also plays a part in witch hysteria folklore. Could it have been part of an underground escape network for those accused of witchcraft? Often cited as evidence is the secret staircase located behind the woodbox. The staircase leads to a concealed room on the 3rd floor. As the legend goes, witches were brought up here under the cover of darkness and hidden from their accusers. Historians currently believe this legend to be false. They, in fact, have found evidence that this house was a station on the Underground Railroad, a passageway for escaped slaves from the South during the Civil War. Although the secret staircase theory may be untrue, the legend illustrates the ongoing power of the witch myth and its ability to capture our imaginations. We will probably never really know why the powerful forces of destruction were unleashed in Salem during the winter of 1692. We do know, however, that lives were lost and families destroyed, not just those of the falsely accused. One of the chief accusers was Ann Putnam, Jr. Throughout her life, she experienced severe guilt for accusing innocent people. A visit to the Danvers archives uncovers a rare document which captures her anguish. It is the minister's record book of Salem. Historian Richard Trask.
A number of years after the witchcraft was over, Ann Putnam, the chief accuser during the witchcraft, who was 9 years old in 1692, wanted to become a full-fledged member of the village church, but she had to get the vote of all of the members. And since there were nurse members within the congregation, she had to write this confession of forgiveness for what had happened in 1692 when she was younger.
In her confession, Ann Putnam Jr. wrote, "I justly fear I have been instrumental with others, though ignorantly and unwittingly, to bring upon myself and this land the guilt of innocent blood." When we return, the witches of Salem today, their beliefs, rituals, and the nature of witchcraft.
We'll be right back with Mysterious Places. We now continue with Mysterious Places.
Anyone visiting Salem today would agree that 300 years after the witch trials, the town has clearly come to terms with its notorious past. Among the researchers and historians studying the events of 1692 are people who call themselves witches. Their presence is felt throughout Salem, particularly at Crowhaven Corner, a store in the center of town. Here, the inquisitive traveler can discover herbs, crystals, and other items associated with the practice of witchcraft. Its founder, Laurie Cabot, is a noted author, lecturer, and a practicing witch. In fact, the official witch of Salem. At home in Salem, Laurie often performs the rites of witchcraft, rites which she believes have been misunderstood for centuries.
I anoint this candle with the energies of the earth. We don't have a devil. We have no Satan. We have no evil gods or goddesses, but we do also worship a goddess, or many goddesses actually, and we see our religion as equality.
Here, Laurie brews a potion designed to encourage love. Far from the devil worshippers of legend, Laurie says the true witches celebrate the magic and power of nature. Here in Town Hall, we see evidence of celebration in the annual May Day ritual known as Beltane. Laurie presides over the festivities.
Basically, what we do at Beltane is to honor the god and the goddess in their youthful aspect. So we will crown a queen and a king, charging the chalice with the energy of the god and the goddess, the balance.
Celebrating with Laurie is her daughter Jody and her grandson. Together, they represent 3 generations of Cabots. Laurie sees her family's freedom to practice their form of witchcraft as a sign of tolerance. However, she is quick to point out the potential danger of persecution and how easily the events of 1692 could be repeated.
It can always happen again. It's very important to educate. It's very important for all people of all races and all religions to tolerate and understand one another and communicate.
Perhaps the most compelling message comes from the victims, those falsely accused. Historian Richard Trask.
They weren't people who wanted to become characters in history. They weren't people who had necessarily lived blameless lives. Some of them were just not very nice people. But what made those 20 different from the 50 who confessed was that they believed, and for whatever reason, they finally believed that life was not as important as truth.
The witch hysteria of the 17th century wasn't confined to Salem. In fact, anyone tracing this dark period in American history will find evidence of witch hysteria in many towns throughout New England. Yet the magnitude of what happened in Salem sets this town apart from the rest. One suspects Salem and its witch trials will forever be cited as an example of intolerance and its sometimes tragic consequences. Until next time, I'm Stacy Keach for Mysterious Places.